global threats. 3 of the nation's top intelligence officials brief lawmakers on Russian activity in the upcoming midterm elections. Immigration reform. The Senate begins a debate including whether to protect hundreds of thousands of young immigrants in the U.S. illegally. Double play. 2 priests from Houston give Pope Francis a unique present. And floating away. New Orleans celebrates its famous Mardi Gras parade. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, February 13th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. 3 of the nation's top intelligence officials have a troubling message for Congress. Russia is trying to meddle in the upcoming midterm elections. They gathered on Capitol Hill saying we'll see bolder and more disruptive cyber operations during the next year, targeting not just the U.S., but the Ukraine and NATO. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi monitored those hearings and joins us. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. The director of the CIA, National Intelligence, and the National Security Agency all agree on this. A new intelligence report on threats says the risk of conflict, especially with North Korea, is higher today than at any time since the end of the Cold War. The intelligence chiefs told Congress other threats include terrorism and cyber attacks.
Frankly, the United States is under attack.
Dan Coates, President Trump's director of national intelligence, says China, Iran, North Korea, and Russia pose the greatest cyber threats.
Some of these actors, including Russia, are likely to pursue even more aggressive cyber attacks with the intent of degrading our democratic values and weakening our alliances.
One by one,
I agree with
the country's top intelligence chiefs.
It is not going to change, nor is it going to stop.
Agree Russia will try to interfere.
This is not going to change.
In the 2018 and 2020 elections. The midterms will decide which party controls Congress. That includes the seat of Democrat Joe Manchin of West Virginia. Today, I caught up with him.
I think Russians' intentions they're more determined now than ever before. They've had so much traction, so much attention for the last 2 years, and thinking that nothing has stopped and nothing has thwarted them from doing that. I think they're going to go at it more vigorously than ever before.
CIA Director Mike Pompeo issues a warning to any cyber attackers.
We do have some capabilities offensively to raise the cost for those who would dare challenge the United States elections.
The intelligence chiefs say they'll share cyber information with state and local governments as well as election officials. Now, Director of National Intelligence Coates says cyber threats aren't just coming from governments, but also terror and criminal groups and even students in dorms, as well as rogue hackers. Lauren?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. The Senate Majority Leader says his chamber can come up with an immigration deal.
Senators have had plenty of time to prepare. There's no reason why we should not reach a bipartisan solution this week.
But there are already disagreements between leaders of both parties. Mitch McConnell says he wants to start voting today, but Democrat Chuck Schumer says he first wants to consider individual bills that would mean several more hours of speeches before any voting. The White House says the security clearance review for a former top staffer was still ongoing when he resigned last week.
The White House Personnel Security Office, staffed by career officials, received information last year and what they considered to be the final background investigation report in November. But they had not made a final recommendation for adjudication to the White House because the process was still ongoing when Rob Porter resigned.
But FBI Director Christopher Wray says the FBI had closed its investigation of White House Staff Secretary Rob Porter in January. Porter resigned last week amid domestic violence accusations from his ex-wives. Vince Colonnese is editorial director at The Daily Caller and host of Mornings on the Mall here in Washington, D.C. on WMAL Radio, joins us now. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Okay, this is a mess to unravel.
Yes.
On Capitol Hill, you have the FBI director saying one thing. At the White House, at the podium, you have Sarah Sanders saying a completely different thing about this Rob Porter mess. What is the truth?
Well, we'd all like to know. And I think what's happened here is the White House has tried to make a case that it's consistent on the basis of the fact that this got bottlenecked inside an Office of Personnel Security, which is, again, it's attached to the White House. There's a little bit of distance between, say, the internal operation of the White House and the Office of Personnel Security. But now that's where these questions go. And the reason this story has extended as long as it has, day by day by day, in a Trump administration where most stories don't last more than 24 hours.
Unless you're Anthony Scaramucci.
That's right.
It lasts about a week.
That's
and then
right.
It's over.
Then you've got a situation where new information keeps coming out. And at the center of this are questions, of course, of what the White House knew, but also the press is rabid for this. This is an opportunity for them, I think, to take on a Trump White House that they don't really like. And I think they see a vulnerability here that they can exploit.
Well, and I think that vulnerability is John Kelly, Chief of Staff, who the media is no longer saluting, and there are calls for his resignation. Is his job in jeopardy? Is he the linchpin to all of this?
Well, he's certainly the target. This is, at this point, I think John Kelly has become the mark here because, again, he's the chief of staff. He's in charge of the staff. And it's on him on whether or not to move somebody like this out. And the press is insisting they have questions about what he knew and when he knew it, which is the two questions we always hear in every scandal. I think the key here, what makes John Kelly so different, is that unlike everybody else in Washington, a lot of people trust John Kelly. They see him as a man of honor and a man with a moral code that actually guides his day-to-day operations. So it will be interesting to see him actually at some point step up to a microphone and offer clear answers about what the timeline was on something like this and why he came to the conclusions he did.
When I've talked to him, he's always seemed to me as a straight shooter. Now, in January 2017, Senator Chuck Schumer warned Donald Trump. He said, if you take on the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday to making your life miserable, getting back at you. Is the FBI trying to get back at the administration for public criticism that the Trump administration launched against it?
I mean, first of all, it's scary to think that the FBI or anybody in any of these intelligence communities be wasting their time with a political bout. I mean, the key here is if everything has been done right, and the leader of the free world, and specifically of the very agencies who are in this tit for tat, if there's a concern, just be transparent with the public. Did you conduct your operations in a good and wholesome way? Then what's there to hide? Just reveal it in public. And that's why during all of these back and forths, I don't want to see memos. I don't want to see interpretations of what went down. I want to see the underlying evidence. I think I err on the side of transparency. The more information out that the public can see and assess for itself, the better. And there should be no reason for agencies of the federal government, specifically who work for the president, to attack him.
Makes sense. Don't attack your boss. I've said that here before. Before we go, does the public care about all this? I mean, we're so into it because we're inside the Beltway and we follow all of this. Do they care? Well,
I think they're sick and tired of it either way. If the whole point of a Russian disinformation campaign was to put the United States in chaos internally, mission accomplished, because that's what we're doing. All we're doing is debating this, and I think people want to see it come to a resolution, and this government owes it to its public to do that.
Vince Colanese, editorial director at the Daily Caller. Thank you so much for joining us. One of Donald Trump's first actions as president was to reinstate and expand a policy that stops U.S. aid from heading to foreign groups that provide or promote abortion. Planned Parenthood says the policy cuts funding for basic health care needs around the world, but pro-life groups say that couldn't be farther from the truth. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. The policy you're talking about was first enacted under President Ronald Reagan. It's called the Mexico City policy. Over the years, Democratic presidents have canceled it, and Republicans like President Trump have reinstated it. Critics say it hurts women. An Associated Press report said it's left impoverished women around the world without treatment for things like HIV and malaria.
The AP article says Africa has been hit hardest. It cites Planned Parenthood, calling the president's action devastating. The abortion provider has another name for the Mexico City policy, saying the global gag rule seriously impedes countries' efforts to improve women's health. But Ann Kiyoko, the founder of African Organization for Families, says the order promotes basic human rights.
It's very helpful to our efforts in Africa to defend life and families.
Trump's expansion of the Mexico City policy keeps all U.S. global health aid from reaching the hands of abortion providers. Kiyoko says abortion providers aren't needed in Africa.
Abortion is illegal in like 90% of African countries. So this organizations that have been offering abortions, they have been doing it contrary to most of the Kenyan laws.
A report from the State Department says it's too early to assess the full range of benefits and challenges, but it does show of the 733 foreign aid organizations or prime partners that have the opportunity to comply with the policy, only 4 have declined. In response to those numbers, Cardinal Timothy Dolan, pro-life chairman of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, says that compliance does not appear to undermine delivery of appropriate health services. Rebecca Ose with the Center for Family and Human Rights says the president's order isn't denying health care services to women around the world.
Nothing about the Mexico City policy changes the amount of funding that the U.S. government is giving to global health.
But groups that promote and provide abortions, like Planned Parenthood and Maria Stopes International, don't comply with it, so they don't receive funds.
When they refuse to comply with the policy, they're essentially holding basic health care services hostage to their abortion agenda, which is very unfortunate for the women on the ground.
Again, U.S. bishops have applauded the president's expansion of the Mexico City policy, and the Trump administration is giving the order a new name, calling it Protecting Life and Global Health Assistance. Lauren?
White House correspondent Mark Irons, thank you. Israeli police recommend indicting Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in a pair of corruption cases. In a nationwide address, Netanyahu denied allegations he accepted lavish gifts and favored treatment in exchange for doing favors. He says it will, quote, end with nothing. And it's all smiles at the Winter Olympics, but top U.S. officials say, don't be fooled by North Korea's charm. The rogue nation remains the world's worst human rights abuser and a potential nuclear threat. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reports from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson says it's too early to judge whether North Korea really will want to come to the negotiating table. He says a delegation from the country is putting up a front at the Olympics, so we may never know if talks are possible until after it's over.
It's all positive news coming out of North Korea. The state-run media releasing these pictures of leader Kim Jong-un welcoming back his younger sister after a trip to South Korea to attend the Winter Games.
I would fully expect everything to be 100% exactly as planned, never a glitch, never a problem. That doesn't necessarily reflect reality, of course.
Dean Chang, a national security expert, says the regime is putting on a diplomatic front, but they have other motives.
They want to drive a wedge between South Korea and the United States. They want to weaken the alliance relationship. They would ideally love to see the U.S. walk away from South Korea.
Chang says it won't work. Lawmakers and top intelligence officials are voicing their concerns about what they call a smile campaign.
The South Korean people seem to be charmed by it to some degree. Some of them seem to be captivated by it. From my point of view, I think it's nothing more than a stall by the North Koreans.
There is no indication there's any strategic change in the outlook for Kim Jong-un and his desire to retain his nuclear capacity to threaten the United States of America. No change there.
Human rights advocates in Korea are also calling out the regime. The North Korean defector, singled out by President Trump as a survivor of atrocities, calls Kim Jong-un's sister arrogant. And Chang says it's important for the U.S. to highlight the country's human rights record.
The fact that this is a regime that continues to run gulags that house, tens if not hundreds of thousands of people under starvation conditions has been pushed off the headlines.
Christianity is outlawed in North Korea, and Christians suffer great persecution there. Catholics have the powerful example of many martyrs on the Korean peninsula, including St. Andrew Kim Taegon. He and many of his family members were killed because of their faith in the 1800s. Lauren?
Wyatt, North Korea has been called the worst abuser of Christians on the planet, and many were hoping the Olympics would turn the page on those past atrocities. Is there any hope that things will get better?
Well, Dean Chang says the Olympics aren't going to likely change anything. North and South Koreans have marched together in past Olympics, but it hasn't led to a breakthrough in terms of diplomacy. But he says China remains the key here because it's North Korea's largest trading partner, and China could put more pressure on the regime. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reporting from the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. So far, Norway continues its lead in the medal count at the Olympics with 11. Netherlands, Canada, and Germany are still ahead of the U.S. We have 6 after winning 2 more since yesterday. The new gold and bronze medals are in snowboarding. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson asks a coalition gathered in Kuwait to remain focused on defeating ISIS. Tillerson says the end of combat operation in the region does not mean the terror group has been defeated. He says it remains, quote, a serious threat to the stability of the region, our homelands, and other parts of the globe. South Africa's ruling party says President Jacob Zuma must leave office. The African National Congress disowns the leader who is plagued by corruption scandals. The president had agreed to resign but requested several more months in office. A judge in London upholds an arrest warrant against Julian Assange. The founder of WikiLeaks has spent more than 5 years evading the law inside Ecuador's embassy in London. Lawyers argued it no longer is in the public interest to arrest him for jumping bail. Assange faced charges of sexual assault and rape made in Sweden in 2012. Swedish prosecutors dropped that investigation last year. The Vatican's sex abuse investigator will meet with a delegation of lay Catholics and priests in Chile. The Associated Press reports the group opposes the appointment of Bishop Juan Barros. He is strongly backed by Pope Francis, but locals accuse him of ignoring claims of clergy sexual abuse. The meeting with Archbishop Charles Scicluna will take place on February 21st. Bishops in Guatemala end their annual assembly with a Lenten message. They recognize Blessed Stanley Rother, an American priest murdered in Guatemala in 1981. The bishops tell the faithful to have the courage of the martyrs and to follow their examples. Coming up, Syrian refugees in Lebanon. We'll hear from someone fighting on the front lines to help them. Three Muslim teenagers in Lebanon are charged with contempt for religion. They walked into a church and made rude gestures toward a statue of the Virgin Mary. A judge, who is also Christian, says they will avoid jail time if they memorize the references in the Quran to the Blessed Mother. Joining me now is Habib Afram. He is the president of the Syriac League of Lebanon. Welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you for having me.
That is quite a story we just heard, the Lebanon judge condemning these boys to read about the Virgin Mary. Is this indicative of the type of Christian persecution?
This is part of it. What is happening in the Middle East for the Christians is a definite genocide. We have been taking from our villages, from Iraq, from Syria. ISIS have been doing a lot of atrocities. We have 2 bishops that are kidnapped, thousands of people that were displaced. This is huge. On the other side, we see in that part of the world a speech of hatred, not accepting the other as equal. And this is what we call radical jihadist Islam.
Is this new?
This is not new, but lately, yes, with ISIS, it has been developed into a very severe problem. That incident in Lebanon proves 2 things. One, that there are somehow in the minds of a new generation, this wrong understanding of what is a religion, of how we live together, conviviality, living with the other, the different in nationality, different in religion, in sect, in ethnic thing. And this judge did something that is unique. Instead of putting these people in jail, asking them to recite verses from the Quran that speak very highly of Jesus and of Mary.
No, I understand that. And it seems to me as if Lebanon has always been a hotbed of persecution.
Lebanon is one of the places where at the same time we had our internal problems, but where Christians and Muslims live together side by side, equal share in politics, in governing, in sharing power. This is what makes Lebanon a unique place. Half of the parliament, half of the cabinet is Muslim and half is Christian. The thing is, there is a war between 2 mentalities.
But what you do specifically...
I do 2 things. I preside the Syriac League, which is a Syriacs, the Arameans. This is a small Christian community. We still speak the language of Jesus Christ. We try to help in all aspects. At the same time, I'm the Secretary General of the Levant organization that takes care of all the Christians of the Middle East. My message is this: if we lose the Christian presence in the Middle East, part of the what is the diversity in the Middle East will be lost. The Middle East and will disappear.
We hear the same thing about Iraq. Thank you so much, Habib Afram, the president of the Syriac League of Lebanon.
Thank you very much for having me.
The last abortion clinic in Toledo, Ohio, will remain open following an agreement with a hospital system. A court ordered the clinic to close because it didn't have a patient transfer plan. This announcement came hours after feminist leader Gloria Steinem, who was born in Toledo, urged one of the city's private hospitals to sign the patient transfer agreement. The Catholic Center, Family Center in Rochester, New York, launches an ad campaign to put a human face on the immigration debate.
I'm a teacher.
A social worker.
I have a dream
to be free.
I'm a human being.
The videos capture personal stories of refugees who have resettled in the U.S. You can read more about this campaign and those featured at seetheirstories.org. The 2 million member group Knights of Columbus is named one of the world's most ethical companies for the 5th consecutive year. The Ethisphere Institute awarded only 3 companies in the life insurance category. It set a new all-time record for charitable donations in 2016 with more than $177 million in donations and more than 75 million hours of service. As always, we thank the Knights for their support of our program. Up next, Pope Francis celebrates Ash Wednesday with a tradition that's centuries old. And one last hurrah! Thousands converge on New Orleans for a pre-Lenten party.
Sì, per me difesa, o Dio, rocca e fortezza che mi salva.
Pope Francis celebrates Mass with Melkite Greek Catholic Patriarch Youssef. The Patriarch says, quote, "I cannot describe the beauty of this communion. There are 1.5 million Melkite Greek Catholics, an Eastern Rite Church under the Holy See. Baseball is as American as apple pie, so when Pope Francis meets with 2 priests from Houston, what do they give him? Oh, a Houston Astros rosary."
He really chuckled along with it and all. And so I said to him, I said, "You have to pray for them, for the Astros." And he says, "No, pray for me, pray for me."
The beads were sold before many Astros games. You remember, the team won whenever those rosaries sold out. The team ended up winning last year's World Series. A group from Houston, including those impacted by Hurricane Harvey, traveled to Rome for a pilgrimage with those priests. Pope Francis will begin Lent with a procession and Mass at a 5th century basilica in Rome. This is a tradition dating back centuries. Vatican correspondent Juliette Lindley gives us a preview.
The Aventine Hill, one of Rome's famous 7 hills. It's filled with stunning churches and monasteries, 2 of which take center stage on Ash Wednesday.
The liturgy begins with a procession from this Benedictine church of Sant'Anselmo. Dominicans and Benedictines accompany the pontiff and chant the Litany of the Saints along the procession, which ends at the Basilica of Santa Sabina.
It's the city's oldest basilica. Pope Gregory the Great formalized the ancient practice of visiting the so-called station churches during Lent at Santa Sabina in the 6th century. Father Abgali Bonaventure lives here. Pope Francis will begin the Lenten season with a special Mass in his church, and that fills him with pride.
For me, it's a great honor, it's a great privilege as a Dominican, personally, because I've been here for a couple of years, and each year I had the opportunity to be that close to the Pope. You know, coming to our house, coming to our church.
This year, Father Bonaventure is remembering Pope Benedict's last Ash Wednesday as pontiff.
During the procession, of course, the Holy Father, Pope Benedict, was already advanced in age, so the procession had to be aided during the procession, and then he had to go into the side altar to change his vestment for Mass.
As anticipation mounts for the Holy Father's arrival, Father Bonaventure says Catholics should focus on his Lenten message this year. Pope Francis is reminding us to pray, fast, and serve the poor. At the Basilica of Santa Sabina, Juliette Lindley, EWTN News Nightly.
And what a beautiful piece by our Rome team. That was just, the photography was impressive. Finally tonight, more than 1 million people are celebrating Mardi Gras, or Fat Tuesday, in New Orleans. Marching bands, floats, and parades mark the city's celebration. Several floats honor the city's 300th anniversary. Mardi Gras marks the end of Carnival season. One last party before Lent begins tomorrow with Ash Wednesday. Here's our party today. Take a look at this cupcake that was made. This is not your ordinary cupcake for our celebration. There is bacon, whipped cream, a pancake, icing, and a cupcake. I have already eaten one, and this one looks like it has my name on it. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. Happy Fat Tuesday. I'm Lauren Ashburn. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless you.